Grew up in a small country town called Brooklyn in the West Australian country. And, they're very conservative places. The farmers are maybe mostly conservative. There was like two churches in the town, the Catholic Church and the Church of England. It was kind of old school conservative. I'm guessing most people would have voted for the conservative parties. Anyway, to cut a long story short, it was very hot there too, by the way, like hot. I remember once working in the shearing shed and seeing a shearer with a hot bottle of beer, like shearing, going through the sheep, like I was doing the roustabouting and drinking a hot bottle of beer while he was shearing. It was hot and kind of tough and kind of conservative. And then towards the end of primary school, this teacher came to our school. I still remember his name. He was called Rick McCullough. And what he did was, this would have been 1969, something like that, 1970 maybe. And he brought in albums. When we were meant to be doing English, he brought in these 60s albums, and our English lessons were to listen to the albums and to then have a conversation about him. Anyway, I'd kind of never met him. Like, he was a really well-read, educated, well-educated liberal. He was just a young guy, in one of his first teaching assignments. But so we would listen to Bob Dylan or the Beatles, Here Comes the Sun, and we'd talk about it. And I got I don't know, I guess if you're in that kind of conservative environment, it was like a breath of fresh air, the 60s to me, the 60s youth. Thunderclap Newman, there's something something in the air, and there's something happening around here kind of thing. And it was like that big gush or the rush of new spirit. And then, fast forwarding a little, at the end of high school, what we call high school, I moved into the back garage at our place, and we listened to 60s music. We were trying to get to the bottom of 60s philosophy, and maybe certainly we stumbled across a little bit of weed, and we'd listened to Bob Marley, who only had songs of freedom, and Bob Dylan, and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, who sounded like the 60s. And I can remember I had a little kind of what's the word? Countercultural library starting there. And there was Erich Fromm, To Have or To Be, like, there was that anti-materialism maybe that was happening, the hippie anti-materialism. And I had, everything by George Orwell and Aldous Huxley. And then, there was one, I think, maybe there was from later, but Deschooling Society. Schooling was a very bad thing. And then I had everything by Hernamn Hesse. And I remember Siddhartha. And, I think that's one thing about the 60s is this interest in the East was starting to develop. And in Siddhartha, it's like that journey. It's a very Eastern kind of journey that's taking place. And in a way, I think probably maybe the first thing I'd ever read about a spiritual journey. And then something happened after that, is that I I took some LSD, and what happened was uh, it was a very powerful experience. It was kind of like I remember sitting with someone. I was with someone, and we were watching the sun come up at Bondi Beach, and really only religious language could kind of describe. Sometimes I've said it was like peering into the cosmos, but it wasn't. It was like being an absolute full participant in the like first dawn at the beginning of time, watching the sun come up. And I remember saying um, to who I was with, you know, that is religious. You know, and she said, "What are you talking about?" You know, she didn't like religion at all, but it was kind of like when much later, jumping forward, when I read Jung and I read about the mysterium tremendum, you know, that it's that tremendous experience of the sacred, the religious experience of awe and mystery and wonder. And I thought of that time. It's kind of like it's way beyond the realm of maybe mundane experience. It's kind of like, and particularly for me was the eros in the cosmos. It's kind of like that, just that surge. But sometimes when you think about your own story, you think about one of the, or you think about the main turning points. And I think like that was definitely a big turning point for me because what I've sometimes said is it's like taking LSD was like blowing the lid off the unconscious, you know, and um, I know that's not always good for people, but I found it to be an incredible kind of revelatory kind of experience. And nothing can kind of take you out of the village of the so-called normal official world more than kind of LSD or as quickly. But you know that whole experience kind of was a big turning point for me because it really started. I think it kind of I began to search more after that experience. Um, it kind of it's like I was trying to find a language to be able to have a speech for that kind of experience. And not long after that, I went to the UK. I went to it was like a rite of passage, where I lived at um, to spend that year, the working kind of holiday in the UK. And I went and lived in London. And towards the end of my time there, a very unusual event happened where I went down to the Thames, went down to the river on a Sunday, and I can remember kind of sitting on a pylon, and it was just to chill out, maybe kind of half meditate kind of thing in the morning. And I just had like the strongest thing that I had to go to India. And sometimes when I don't know, I hear James Hillman talk about the daemon. It's like you can sometimes have fateful times in your life when the daemon or the fate or something breaks through that takes you down a different route, maybe, because that's what I've often thought. There were many things I was expected to do, many things I should do, consciously, maybe many things I would have thought I was going to do. And then there was this breakthrough that I had to go to India, and I went to India. And I mean, I've spoken about that a bit, the initial thing of going to India, maybe having that little bit of a culture shock in India. But I grew to love India very much, and um, I used to talk with someone called Surya down in he I think he'd been a university professor or something, but he was the head of the kitchen, and we used to go down there and talk. And really, he had a wonderful mind, and he talked to me about yoga and the tradition of yoga that had been, handed down, and how there were different kinds of yoga, and um, there were the karma yogis that liked doing action, and there were the jnani yogis that loved the knowledge and the philosophy of yoga, and there were the bhakti yogis. Later, again, this is jumping ahead a little bit, I think that's interesting. Like even in the West, like there are people like fit into the different categories, like the action or the scholars, the knowledge, or the devotional side or whatever. It seems that so many people that are kind of on a path might kind of lean more towards one of those kinds of paths than the other. But he passed on so much of what he knew about meditation, about yoga, and there was that kind of deep. I found after a while, like India was going into my bones. It took me a while to kind of lean into it, let's say, and it was a big change for me. Like in 1 week, I gave up cigarettes, alcohol, marijuana, any kind of that stuff, like all within 1 week. So it was kind of like that shift over to something very, the whole thought was that through meditation, one could naturally have experiences. And it was literally up the mountain in Rajasthan, and you could kind of see over the plains, the desert, nearly all the way to Pakistan. That's what it seemed like. And but metaphorically, it was spiritually up the mountain. It was like, having that tremendous experience, or that tremendous spiritual experience. And it's like kind of looking down on the world below. And I remember, I went back to Sydney from there, and I started to teach meditation, and that was a wonderful experience because it was an exposure to just all different kinds of people. Like I remember we had, I used to run this program, and I got a job with one of the, a big kind of worldwide ad company in one of their internal consulting wings. And I ran this program called Meditation for Busy People. And, I remember one event up in Whale Beach in Sydney, and there were, people from, artists and people from that kind of crowd, the movie industry and all of that, and then business people. And so it was like meeting a lot of that, what is it, that side of town, if you want to put it that way. And then in the normal meditation sessions, there was, people coming in from all kind of sectors of society. And then I can also remember going out to a youth detention center and taking programs there on meditation. And like, maybe, to be honest, maybe that's where I learned the most, because you can't speak any crap at the youth detention center, really, like, or anything that isn't true. So I started to teach for a long while, and then, I started traveling around Asia and being involved in different programs. And I remember working, running some programs for the office of the president in the Philippines, and then, the Orient Hotel in Thailand, which was the world's best hotel. So it was kind of like traveling and teaching those kinds of programs on managing change and meditation and kind of drawing on that knowledge from the East, you know, to make it into kind of like learning programs. And it, I thought I'd be doing that for a long, long time, you know, maybe forever. And probably similar to what's happened to a lot of people in midlife, there was like, I don't know, you know, I remember someone saying, it's like things just died. I remember Jung saying, it's like I can't remember the exact words, but it's like your dearest expectations and ideals um, uh, are maybe somehow in you know shattered at the midlife, or it was a bit like a death. It was like whilst I had kind of, you know, if I just kind of extrapolated out within my path, that I thought I'd be doing what I was doing there for really forever. But it's just like everything went in. It was like a death. There's no other way to describe it. It was like, and I remember someone saying to me, when the tide goes out, you know, there's nothing you can do. And it's kind of like, it's just like that life died for me. And jumping forward, I started to have lots of dreams, you know, and the big change, or the big change in direction, came for me was when I was in Glebe in Sydney, and I wandered into Glebe books, and James Hillman's book, The Myth of Analysis, kind of fell out on top of me. And I don't know, I suppose when I look back now, there was that shift from spiritual, like the, you know, I was in a spiritual group, I guess, and a yoga meditation group, more towards psychology. And the thing that I loved about Hillman, I remember with Hillman, there was one of the first things is the soul loves depth, you know, and um, the psyche loves depth. And then Hillman is so much into the myth of, you know, uh, always introducing the myth, Greek myth as in particular. And the psyche. So for me, I would say now, looking backwards, you know, the move from that world of the spirit to the depth of the soul, to, or more towards the depth of the soul, the deepening into the soul. And I came across Hillman way before I came across Jung. It was like Hillman introduced me to Jung. So in a way, I don't know. I always think Hillman kind of pointed me towards Jung in a way. So um, he got me onto Jung. But I think, you know, that having belonged to a group, I don't like to kind of belong to the Jungian cult, if you put it that way, or the group. I've kind of, you know, once bitten, twice shy as far as groups go. I'm kind of a bit standoffish of the group structure, or uh, the clique of that kind of thing. But in terms of Jung himself, who I think is one of the great kind of shamans of the last, you know, 200 years or whatever, and his red book, and with Hillman, I love Hillman's Hillman's kind of got that poetic mind, that, you know, that grounding in the romantic poets, the poetic basis of the mind. He's very literary, and he's got that he doesn't like psychology just being confined to clinical language. He wants to broaden, um, and I think maybe that's where I would be at now in the story, is that I think that I would have always said, even 6 months, 12 months ago, that it's kind of like, individuation or soul making. It's like the deepening into the soul. But I remember Marie-Louise von Franz saying once, it's like individuation is like a widening of the consciousness. And it's kind of like what I'm interested in, especially with the Jung and the World podcast and stuff like that, is the widening. It's, to me, it's like, um, I remember what happened, what they did at Eranos, where, there were biologists and, when they had those meetings, so there was some people from the Jung world and there were many other people. And I can remember, say, for example, Hillman spoke at a lot of those Eranos lectures, and he was very affected by, I think his name was Albert Portman. His last name was Portman anyway. But he was a biologist. And in a way, that really got Hillman onto the animal. And Hillman wrote a lot about the kind of the animal of the psyche, or that was a big theme for him. So I kind of like this cross fertilization, this widening with other people, with people from other fields. I like that idea of the broad-minders, people from other religious traditions, people from other scholarly fields, interdisciplinary is maybe the way some people describe it, and also going out onto the street. To me, it seems that to put sometimes Jungian understandings in a less formal, conceptual kind of language, and more that, in a way, more as experiences that can be understood on the street.